had the handing over of those women soldiers that had been taking place. We showed that to you on a sidebar. Unfortunately, the cameras that are stationed there, we couldn't really see as that was taking place. So what's expected to happen now? In fact, those hostages have been handed over to the IDF. Let's bring in SABC News International News Editor Sophie Mokoena, who will walk us through what is expected to take place next. We are monitoring. I'm sure you'll see on a sidebar in just a moment, monitoring as soon as those hostages that have now been released and handed over to the IDF will be put in a chopper. Ms. Sophie, talk us through what's expected to take place next.
Yes, you are correct. While the president was speaking, we saw the 4 female soldiers, the hostages, moving to a podium where we saw the Red Cross and Hamas signing some documents, and they went down and they went into the car of the Red Cross, and then they drove off. I think they are now on the way, about to arrive at the southern border, where we have a helicopter and some IDF members who are waiting to receive them. On the other hand, now there's movement in prison where now a process is underway to release the Palestinians, and therefore that overlap is happening right now. They will get into a helicopter in the southern border. There's a small military base there. They will be taken to Tel Aviv to a hospital where they will be debriefed and also get medical attention if there's a need. And then they will be handed over to their families. At the Tel Aviv square, hundreds of Israelis are waiting there just to get a glimpse on the big screens of them perhaps arriving or the chopper landing in Tel Aviv.
And we could see members of the International Red Cross a bit earlier on. These, in fact, are pictures of those hostages that have been released. And I'm seeing some vehicles there that look to be, with some police signage there. I'm not quite sure. But, Ms. Sophie, the release, talk us through. We head now to the second phase of this process, which will also include, as you earlier alluded to, the release of the bodies. Talk us through what else more are we expecting, because the release of these hostages is also part of the ceasefire's first phase.
Yes, it will continue this first phase with another batch next week or during the week. I don't know, there's a date to be announced, because remember they have to release 35 people during the first phase. And therefore, but right now, the talks in relation to implementation of phase 2 must start. And that phase 2, as you pointed out, it will include releasing the bodies and other agreements and more Palestinians leaving the prison. But that one is going to be a bit tricky and very difficult. We will get more information perhaps later today when the Israel Defense Force or the Prime Minister of Israel is addressing the nation. On the other hand, I think Hamas, after today, they will also issue a statement, a recorded statement.
All right, if we could ask our team in the studio to put up those visuals once again of those 4 hostages. Of course, you would know that the release of those 4 is also basically in exchange for the 200 Palestinian prisoners under that ceasefire agreement. The 4 soldiers, the names which I had mentioned a bit earlier on, had all been stationed at an observation post on the edge of Gaza and abducted by Hamas fighters who overran their base. Of course, an attack on Israel. That was on October the 7th in 2023. Yes, that was last year. So if we're looking at the time, this is certainly relief for these families. We cannot emphasize this more, Sophie, as we talk about this agreement and, how the ink, is drying on this agreement. But there are faces to this tragedy. There are families behind this tragedy. There's extensive trauma to this tragedy and unthinkable rebuilding, which we don't even know how that's going to happen, is what the world is talking about at the moment. Where do you even begin?
Yes, you are correct, Griselda. When you look at the destruction in Gaza, the loss of lives, more than 40,000 Palestinians have been killed. It's a huge, huge damage. And I think it's an indictment on the leadership of the world that we have arrived at this situation where we are talking about more than 40,000 Palestinians who have died since October 7. On the other hand, 1,200 Israeli citizens, but that's not only Israel, that included other nationals as well, having been killed during that time based on the information from Israel, the 40,000 information from the authorities in Gaza. And therefore, it has been a huge damage. But to rebuild in terms of infrastructure, it's going to take trillions to rebuild Gaza. And this is where you have the international community already, countries jostling for who is going to control the rebuilding of Gaza.
Yeah.
But also, when you listen to the tone of those who support Israel, the question of what's going to happen to Palestine. Is Palestine finally going to be free? Rebuilding, and you will again come back and destroy, because you don't want to accept that Palestine must be a state on its own. That's where the problem is, Griselda.
Yeah, we've spoken about the 4 soldiers that have now been released. Let's talk about the 200 prisoners that will be released in exchange, of course. Well, it certainly looks to be live coverage that we're having here at the moment. Quickly, let's just go live. It seems there's to be an address at this moment.
בידינו, הן בידיים בטוחות, הן בדרך הביתה. חיכינו לרגע הזה, עם ישראל חיכה לרגע הזה. הן חברו לכוח צה"ל ושב"כ ברצועה, והן כעת הגיעו למתחם הקליטה ברעים לפגוש את
Well, unfortunately, our viewers might not be able to understand that at this stage. We'll certainly give you a translation of what's being said a little bit later on. But this, of course, the first press briefing since the release of these soldiers. And of course, we did indicate the release, of course, coming after. They had, of course, been abducted after being stationed at a post on the edge of Gaza and abducted, of course, by Hamas fighters who'd overran that base. That was in October of last year. Mesov, if we look at the other side, the 200 prisoners who'll be freed as part of this exchange, we understand that they include convicted militants serving life sentences for their involvements in these attacks.
Yes, that would include, but for now, people who are being released, it is still people who are not regarded as dangerous in the eyes of Israel, not necessarily from Palestine and other international community. And they will move to that phase, the critical phase of releasing even those perhaps who were involved here, because many of those who are being released, they were just taken in the streets of Gaza and taken to Israel territory in the prisons, and it includes women. And as I pointed out a few days ago, we saw a 4-year-old being taken to a military court in Israel to answer. Just imagine, these are children, and therefore the damage in the Middle East is huge. And as you pointed out, as I indicated earlier on, this is a media briefing by the Israel Defense Force spokesperson giving information which speaks to the fact that, yes, the hostages are now in the hands of the Defense Force. Unfortunately, we are not able to get a translation, but we will bring you information later today in other platforms or the other colleagues in different sister shows in terms of what he said earlier on. And also we will bring you perhaps the reaction from Hamas, because they are also going to release a statement, and we'll look at the international community reaction.
Absolutely. We're expecting lots of reaction into the day. Sophie Mokoena, SABC News International News Editor, thank you very much indeed for staying with us.